Hi, everybody. This is Craig Turner. He is a convert to the Catholic faith, and he was ushered in by the Blessed Mother herself, showing her many signs and leading him gently on the way. Craig Turner is the father of a family of 5 and also a business owner in the Washington, D.C. area. He began his career in journalism in the 1980s, covering Capitol Hill, and has worked in both communications and PR. Some of his articles, carried by Griffin Communications, have reached more than 5,000 newspapers in North America and have been posted by MSNBC, Business Week, and Reuters. He has had 2 auto presentations published by Lighthouse Media, Augustine Institute, and his 2 books, Word of Faith and Words of Hope, are available from St. Benedict's Press. Here you are. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
By the way, I have to compliment you on your beautiful speaking voice.
Oh,
you're perfect for speaking.
That's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Without further ado,
must be the filter that I use on my computer. I'm just kidding.
So go ahead, Craig. I won't interrupt you anymore. God bless you.
No, that's okay. That's okay. So our topic obviously is each day is about the tragedy of abortion. There are parallels that go on between the different life issues. So we have abortion, we have euthanasia now, assisted suicide has become an issue, and then of course in times past, even on this particular continent, child and infant sacrifice. So we say sometimes that every truth leads to every other truth. Well, every evil also is connected, and they are connected in various ways. And we can see what happens, how a certain evil is defeated, and we sometimes take that path in order to defeat the evil of our day, whatever that evil happens to be. So in this case, what I'm talking about is what happened on this continent with the Aztecs. The Aztecs practiced infant sacrifice. They had a very, very successful civilization in many respects. They had the most beautiful city that has ever been built on this planet, apparently, based on what the Spaniards saw. But at the same time, they had the most horrific of all sacrifices of any civilization at all. So to understand this, we have to look at the Aztecs themselves. They had a calendar. Their calendar is actually kind of famous. And some of every month had a particular god or some gods, plural, that were honored, and those gods were sacrificed to. There was human sacrifice that always went on every month of the year. The 3 of the first 4 months of the Aztec calendar, the Aztecs would sacrifice children to the gods. The 4th month of the Aztec calendar was for Quetzalcoatl. He's a famous figure now. He was honored and sacrificed to with both boys and girls. Quetzalcoatl meant feathered serpent. And it's interesting because as I give my talk here today, you're going to see that there are parallels. Actually, what happens is the devil takes what might be holy and then corrupts it. And takes something that might be a godlike thing and changes it into something evil. We see in the Bible actually kind of an image of the devil being the snake in the book of Genesis, and we see that the serpent is the ancient one, the evil one. Well, Quetzalcoatl meant feathered serpent, and he was the god of wind. So what happens when later in my story you'll see that Cortez shows up, and he's brought in large ships powered by the wind. It's a kind of an interesting contrast there, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But I want to tell you about another important deity. This deity, not quite as famous, but still very important. The name of the deity was Tonantzin. Tonantzin was a woman. She was the goddess who had a special chamber built for herself atop the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan. And she was a very demanding goddess. She exhibited very little mercy, And her nickname that they used for her was Our Mother, or they would call her Our Lady. She required human sacrifice to appease her, unlike Mary, who obviously is the reverse of this. She was the goddess of sustenance and actually the goddess of human fertility and childbirth. Many times people go to Mary to ask for a child. I have somebody at my church. He's 82 years old now, but he told me the story about how he went to Fatima with his wife. They could not conceive children. They were told they would never be able to. While they were at Fatima, they prayed together, would you please bring us some children? And lo and behold, 9 months and 2 weeks later, they had children. They started their family. Mary will answer those requests. Tonantzin, on the other hand, is known as Snake. She was known as Our Lady, and she was also known as Snake. She's famous because her main temple was atop Tepeyac Hill. That was 6 miles north of Tenochtitlan, north of the city. So today our modern day abortion is not really an offering to an idol as much as it is a holocaust that's made for the self. The most common reason given by a woman for her abortion is that having a child at that time would disrupt her plans for her life. So only 1% of abortions, most of you probably already know this, only 1% of abortions are in order to save the life of the mother or because the child was conceived because of rape or incest. That's in this country here. The other 99% are performed because of a host of reasons unrelated to these. And it means that those other 99% are the person's life is taken, a life in the womb, because it is subordinate to the plans of a person who's carrying that life. Well, the Aztecs did not perform child sacrifice because of convenience or a result of a medical reason. They believed that what they were doing was they were feeding the gods. It's a very demonic concept. And of course, as we were praying the Chaplet of Divine Mercy today, I was thinking about this interesting concept, how the Aztecs felt that they were offering these humans to God in order to appease God and make God happy. But in reality, when we pray the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, the funny thing is God is being offered to God. We offer Jesus, body, blood, soul, and divinity, to the Father. It's interesting how the devil took what was true and then changed it and made it so that humans would then hurt each other. The more sacrifices that were made, the greater the power that God had. And this is obviously contrary to the plans of God. God was going to overturn this, and so he sent a bunch of people in large ships powered by the wind, and here comes Cortez. He lands on, I'm sorry, before I get to Cortez, I have to tell you something. It's a really fascinating story. I doubt anybody here knows this story, but it's one of the most interesting stories that I've ever encountered in my life. It deals with a near-death experience that happened in the 1500s, and we hear about near-death experiences today in the United States. There have been in excess of 20 million of them, but going backwards in time, they become less frequent because it was more difficult to bring a person back to life. And then when you get back to the 1500s, we have Princess Poppinson, and prior to her, I know of Christina the Astonishing. Some of you may have heard of her. She lived, should have looked that up, maybe in the 1200s or something to that effect. She was in the Middle Ages. And then a couple of other people that I've heard of who actually died and then came back to life again. But Princess Poppinson is one of the first. She was actually the sister of Montezuma. So she was a princess. 10 years before Cortez arrived, so it would be 1509 because Cortez arrived in 1519. In 1509, she got sick, very seriously ill, and then she died. So there was an elaborate funeral, being a princess, and she had her own tomb. She was buried in the tomb on the grounds of her palace. And then within about 24 hours after she had been buried, she was found alive again. She came spontaneously back to life again. Those who were her attendants and subjects were terrified and shrieked, but she calmed them down and then told them to bring her brother Montezuma to see her. Montezuma shows up and he is dumbfounded. "Is it truly you, my sister?" he says. "Yes, it is." She says, "It is Pampinson." And then she goes on to tell him a story. She says, "I found myself," this is what happened while she was dead. "I found myself on a seemingly unending plain. In the center of the plain, I saw a road that forked ahead in several paths. Near the road, there was a river with a strong, tumultuous, and frightening current. I thought about swimming across the river when a tall young man stopped me. He was wearing a long tunic, white as snow in winter. His whole body was as bright as the sunlight." Now, all of us as Christians immediately think of the Transfiguration. But nobody had seen, actually in this hemisphere, had encountered or knew about the Transfiguration. Pompinson then describes a mark on the forehead of the man made of light. On his forehead, she says, was a cross. And she demonstrates to her brother by putting two fingers together like this to show what a cross, exactly what she meant. One horizontal and the other vertical. Then she says, "Taking my hand in his, he said to me, 'Stop, my child, for the time for you to cross the river has not yet arrived. God loves you, although you don't know him.'" Walking by the river, she says, "I saw lots of skulls and bones of dead people and heard cries so sorrowful that my heart filled with pain." Her guide then says to her, "The cries you hear are those of the souls of your ancestors that are paying for their wrongdoing and will continue paying for eternity." So she says, "Casting my eyes on the river's current, I saw great ships." Now she's having a vision that the man of light is showing her of something that's going to happen in the near future. "Casting my eyes on the river's current, I saw great ships, and in them men of different color and clothing. They were white and bearded, had banners in their hands, and helmets on their heads." So she describes painted across the sail on at least one of these ships, she sees a large cross that matches the symbol on the forehead of her guide. And her guide then says, "Those ships you see approaching belong to men who by force will destroy and rule this kingdom. They will bring with them the knowledge of the true God, creator of heaven and earth." He then says that after this coming war, the people will be given a sacred bath that will restore their souls and have their misdeeds erased. "You," he says, "will be the first to receive this sacred bath, and with your example, you must guide the rest of the nation." So she is returned to her body. She miraculously comes alive again, and she has this conversation with Montezuma, her brother. He listens to this story. He's a man of with beliefs in omens and the supernatural, so this is not completely foreign to him. As a matter of fact, he would have to be if he truly believed that murdering all these innocent people was necessary. And he's horrified because his sister, who already had been dead, has come back to life and described this being of light who gave her these visions and showed her the future. 10 years later, on Good Friday, April 22nd, 1519, Hernan Cortez lands on the coast of what is present-day Mexico with 508 soldiers on 11 ships. He names the place where he lands Veracruz, the True Cross. And then 2 days later, on Easter Sunday, Mass is said for the crew, one of the very first Masses ever to be said on this continent. In order to discourage any mutiny or rebellion, Cortez burns 10 of his 11 ships in the harbor. He's a man who has come, you would have to say, he's come with a real serious attitude. He is ready for something, but we don't know yet because he hasn't even really encountered the people. He encounters the people. He finds out that there's supposedly this great civilization inland, and he heads off to go encounter this great civilization in the center of this land. Meanwhile, a courier has run from the ocean and crossed the causeway that separates this island capital from the mainland, and he arrives in Tenochtitlan carrying a large shiny object for Montezuma to see. And to Montezuma's great fear and astonishment, he's handed a large metal helmet, the same described by his sister, with a black cross branded across the front. So Cortez arrives. He's greeted by Montezuma, and actually Montezuma does not wage battle against him. He accepts Cortez as an honored guest and nobleman, so much so that he houses him in his father's palace. I guess he tells his father, get out, because we got some other people in here this week. So he gets honored as a great nobleman. Part of the reason is because Aztec legend had it that the great feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl, who had actually founded their capital, would return one day. And when Montezuma sees Cortez, this white bearded man, which was the description of Quetzalcoatl, he believes that Cortez is either an emissary of the feathered serpent god, or maybe he just might be Quetzalcoatl himself. So Montezuma is eager for his new guests to leave. What he thinks he can do to get them to leave as quickly as possible is give them a bunch of gifts and show them to the door. But what he doesn't realize is that the Spaniards have come looking for gold. They also are there to evangelize. But in reality, the conquistadors, they're most of them, I would say, their primary objective was to find gold for the crown. What happens is Montezuma offers incredibly lavish gifts to Cortez. Gold carried by 100 porters. Among these gifts are rooms full of breastplates and shields of gold and silver, necklaces of jade set in gold, scepters studded with precious stones, gold rings, gold bells, statues in gold of jaguars, monkeys, and armadillos, as well as other things like blankets and quilts, elaborate headdresses, and even Aztec books made of bark. Well, Cortez graciously accepts these gifts, realizes he has struck gold, so to speak, and he's in the right spot. He takes the treasure, and he has it transported back to his ship, his one surviving ship. They load this onto the ship and send it back to Spain, but they stop off in Cuba on the way to refuel, not to refuel, but to get supplies. And it was completely a secret mission, but there was a witness who later said they saw that there, quote unquote, was no other ballast than gold in this ship. So unfortunately for Montezuma, he thought he was getting rid of the person that he really didn't want in his kingdom anymore, and he only made him hungrier than before. So the prospect of obtaining gold was not the only factor that led them to Tenochtitlan. But they were treated as royalty, housed in the palace. But the Spaniards, beginning on the first morning, to their great horror, were awakened by shrieks and screams of human sacrifice that were being carried out atop the pyramids and were being performed in unspeakable numbers. Unspeakable numbers. These sacrifices took place by the thousands by the Aztecs. Now, I'm going to tell you one thing. It's a half paragraph. If you are squeamish, you can mute and you won't hear this. I'm just going to give you a couple of sentences of what they did. But they would, while the victim was alive, they would plunge a knife into the chest and pull the heart out as it was beating. And then the bodies themselves would be rolled down the sides of the pyramids. And when the corpses reached the bottom to the ground, they were cannibalized. The Aztecs literally practiced cannibalism. They ate the flesh of these victims. This, they believed, was what gave the sun god its power to rise again and to cross the sky. The more sacrifices that were offered, the more powerful the gods became. 100,000 skulls hung on only one skull rack of many skull racks in the Aztec camp. And chroniclers recorded that during the latter days of the empire, in a period of only 4 days in 1487, 80,000 people were sacrificed. So Cortez, being a devout Catholic man, demanded that Montezuma stop the sacrifices. he said that there was no excuse whatsoever for this, but within a week of making his demands, he has come to the end of his rope, and Montezuma is not going to change. So even though he's completely outnumbered in every way by the Aztecs, because the Aztec civilization was huge, they had many warriors, Cortez takes Montezuma and puts him under house arrest and confines him to his palace. Then he climbs the stairs of the main temple, orders the priest to remove the symbols of the Aztec gods, and then places a cross and an image of the Virgin Mary in their place. And then to complete this change, the holy sacrifice of the Mass is celebrated on the premises. It's amazing because the church, when the church has a victory, for example, the victory, we place a cross there. Some people don't realize this. For example, if you go to St. Peter's Square, you'll see an obelisk there. It's a big, carved out of one stone, and at the very top is a cross, because when the church finally was victorious and was allowed to practice and then became the religion of the empire, of the Roman Empire, we put crosses in various places. That was our symbol of victory. Well, when the Spaniards began to discuss the sacrifices that the Aztecs were performing, they told them, you don't have to sacrifice these people to your gods. God himself has already made the sacrifice. Now, this was news to them, and it was a little bit difficult for them to understand. But they told them that God's own Son had come to earth many years before, and he was sacrificed so that we don't have to offer up our own children. No more human sacrifice was necessary at all. In fact, according to the complete illustrated history of the Aztec and Maya, it's a book that I have, when the sacrifice was made, the person who was offering the sacrifice would take this person. Sometimes they were a slave, sometimes it was a child, sometimes it would have been someone captured in a war. They would say, "Here I find my well-beloved son." If you've read the Gospels, you've heard that line before. The prisoner then is supposed to turn and reply, "Here I encounter my well-respected father." This is a vague and corrupted image of the true relationship between God and man. So after the fall of the Aztec Empire, what happens is Cortez continues. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to grab I'm going to have to plug in my computer here because my battery is getting a little bit low. Let me go like this. There we go. Sorry about that. So what happens is that Cortez is successful. He overcomes against tremendous odds. He's probably simply because he's got God on his side on this. And then he is able to defeat the Aztec Empire. So the Spaniards take over during this period of time, and during the next 12 years, there is relative peace. The Aztec Empire itself has all the idols are being destroyed, and but in the meantime, the Spaniards and even the clergy are unable to convert the people, because some of the tactics, not that the clergy had, but that the Spanish conquistadors had, were pretty brutal. They were just uncompromising, and in some ways they were cruel to the indigenous peoples. So that's a sort of a bad spot in this whole story. But there's a bright lining, because on December 12th of 1531, so roughly 12 years later, Juan Diego, a 57-year-old former Aztec who had recently converted to the Catholic faith, was walking through the countryside on his way to church in Mexico City. He would, this is an amazing part of this story, he would wake up each day at 3 a.m. and walk for 9 hours through the countryside all the way to the city, and then attend Mass, because he knew that what was contained in the host was the true God. And he wanted the true God in himself, in his soul. And then he would turn around and he would walk 9 hours back out. It's an amazing devotion that this man had. So as one day he was passing by Tepeyac Hill, this was December 12th of 1531. This is the mount where the shrine to the goddess Tonantzin had once stood. He heard the sound of birds singing exquisitely, and their singing was so angelic and divine, he thought, that no earthly bird could ever imitate the beauty of their melody. And then he hears a woman's voice at the top of the hill call out to him gently in a voice that sounded, he said, like music. Juan, dearest Juan Diego. So in the literal translation, Mary said to him, Juansin, Juan Diegotzin. That's as you know, we have Tonantzin, and there's other goddesses whose the TZIN at the end means you who I revere, you who are special, you who are worthy of being honored. Okay, and she called to Juan Diego in this way, and he climbs the hill to find the maiden, and he's in ecstasy. He thought he was in heaven, and he said, strangely, the rocks and the vegetation on the hill shimmered in a brilliant, translucent turquoise and emerald. And it was here, he said, that the Virgin Mary appeared to him in full splendor, radiant and beautiful, and told him to take a message to the local bishop. So the bishop was Father Zumárraga, and he does not believe Juan Diego. You all know this story, I believe. And as this goes on, he is, Juan Diego goes back and forth, and finally, the bishop is asked for a sign. Juan Diego sees Mary again, and she assembles roses in his tilma, and he holds his tilma closed, and then goes off to show the bishop. And when he enters the room with the bishop, he opens up to show him the Castilian roses, which did not exist in Spain at the time. Out cascade the roses, and then at the same time, we see the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe on the tilma that he was wearing. So the image of Guadalupe shows Mary wearing a sash around her waist to indicate that she was pregnant. The sash was high, which meant that she was about 9 months pregnant. And then her eyes, which were downcast instead of peering straight forward, were actually an Aztec sign that meant she was mortal, not a goddess. The goddesses and the gods in all the Aztec art would look straight forward, and then those who were mortals would look down. They should never meet the eyes of the gods. So she was not a goddess, she was mortal, and her hands folded like this were actually an Aztec sign that meant she came bearing a gift. So we have this sign, which means prayer, and then the Aztec sign, which interestingly is the same, means I come to you bearing a gift. The gift itself was twofold. First, the horror of human sacrifice that had taken so many lives was now vanquished. But secondly, within 2 weeks would be born the true God, who at Christmas time would come to this world. So Juan Diego's uncle, who was almost dead from an illness, also received an apparition of the Virgin Mary during one of these visits. And he was instantly healed of his illness, which was about to take his life, when Mary appeared to him and told him that she was to be known as Mary of Guadalupe. In fact, the term in Nahuatl is their language, is Coatlachupe. And Coa means serpent, Tla means the, and Chupe means to crush or stamp out. So she was telling him, I am Mary, she who crushes the serpent. It was a way of, and interestingly enough, it was, she appeared to Juan Diego at the place where the temple had been built for the woman who was referred to as the snake. So there's this interesting parallel. It was a reference to the battle that begins in Genesis 3:15, goes all the way through Revelation 12, and we see that it is a battle with the devil, the primal demon of this world, the one who wants to take our lives. So as we go on, we see that there are many symbols that are shown with regard to the tilma that are pro-life symbols that we can use and are used at times to show us that God loves life, and he loves our lives from the very conception until our natural death at the end of a natural life. The cloak, for example, the tilma, has lasted for 500 years, even though a cactus fiber cloak like this only lasts about 20 years. There are other miraculous things that are in the image. For example, her eyes tell a story as well. But the colors that Juan Diego witnessed tell a story as well. The rocks and the cacti on Tepeyac Hill shimmered like turquoise, the color used by Aztecs to indicate life. So, and then gold, the gold and turquoise and rose colors that are in Mary's garments in the image of the tilma were Aztec colors of royalty. So the interesting thing is that Mary is showing, here's what, the Aztecs had a law that you were not allowed to wear the colors of royalty unless you were royalty, and the penalty was death. So gold, turquoise, and rose colors were shown on this on the mantle of Mary and her cloak in the tilma of Guadalupe. But at the same time, she was showing she was not royal. She was not a goddess because her eyes were not showing straight ahead. So by appearing in this tilma as an Aztec woman, because she had Aztec features, to a man of Aztec origin and speaking the native language Nahuatl, Mary showed that the Aztecs actually could accept Christianity as their own. So what's really most interesting, though, is that there are a series of 46 golden stars on the turquoise-colored cloak of Mary in the image. And only recently was the meaning of the stars discovered. These stars, which were golden in color, the Aztec color for royalty, represent the 46 chromosomes that are found in each cell of the human body from the moment of conception until death. So Mary is pregnant with a sash that's showing that she is 9 months pregnant, and the human cells, even at the earliest stages of life, always contain 46 chromosomes. She's showing that we are royalty ourselves, that in God's eyes we are special, we are dignified, we are beautiful, and that we should treat each other in this way. So the conclusion of the story is the following. Princess Pompinson converts, and she's baptized in 1524. Like Juan Diego, she lives a life of exceptional virtue and is present to see the conversion of more than 8 million people during the first 7 years after the apparitions at Guadalupe. It is the greatest mass conversion of any people to any faith or religion in the history of the world. And meanwhile, the Shrine of Guadalupe becomes the most visited religious shrine in the world with 20 million visitors a year, followed by St. Peter's in Rome, which receives 18 million. So we see in this beautiful story God's love for us, that we are worthy of reverence, that our true colors are the colors of royalty, that we are precious, especially in the womb, that even inanimate objects like rocks shimmer like emeralds and turquoise, the signs and colors of life. May we reveal to the human race that we are precious, beloved, cherished, and treasured by God, regardless of our size or stage of development. God bless you.
Thank you, Craig. Oh my gosh, that was outstanding. That is so beautiful. When you just study the history, how it intermingles in, and everything that you were saying, it almost seems like the devil doesn't have any originality, that he has to mock everything that God is. But
that's right. It's
corrupted, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope that you come again. You're beautiful, beautiful unflowering of this story. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
God bless you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.